Most people think the funeral is the end of the tragedy, but for me, it was just the opening argument. 2 days after we lowered my father into the ground beside my mother, I put my key in the lock of my childhood home, and it refused to turn. My older sister hadn't just changed the locks, she had rewritten our history, standing there while the neighbors watched. I didn't know yet that the house wasn't a legacy, it was a trap. The exhaustion of burying one parent is a heavy, drowning thing, but burying two within 19 days changes the atmosphere entirely. It stops being a tragedy and starts feeling like a curse. I arrived in my hometown with a suitcase packed for a weekend and stayed for a month that felt like a decade. My mother went first, a sudden stroke that took her before the ambulance cleared the driveway, and my father followed her less than 3 weeks later. The doctors called it heart failure, but the neighbors, in their hushed and eager voices, called it a broken heart. I did not have a poetic name for it, I just called it the end of the world. My older sister, Caroline, did not look like the world was ending. She looked like she was launching a brand. At 35, Caroline was the polished, golden child of our family, the one who had stayed in town, married a man with a steady jawline and a vague consulting job, and curated a life that looked beautiful from the street. I was 32, the quiet one who moved 3 states away to work in logistics, single, private, and currently wearing a black dress that felt too tight across the shoulders. For the entire week between my father's death and the service, Caroline was a whirlwind of efficiency. She selected the casket, the flowers, the music, and the catering whenever I tried to step in, to offer an opinion on the hymns or the burial plot. She would place a manicured hand on my forearm and offer a sympathetic, terrifying smile. "You just rest, Bella." She would say, "You look so tired. Let me handle the heavy lifting. You are a guest here, really." She said it so sweetly that it took me 3 days to realize I was being erased. I was not a daughter grieving her parents. I was a distant relative being managed. She spoke to the funeral director alone. She met with the pastor alone. When visitors came to the house, our parents' house, the sprawling Victorian on Elm Street that needed a new roof, but held our entire childhood in its creaking floorboards, Caroline greeted them at the door. She accepted the casseroles and the condolences, blocking the hallway with her physical presence so that I remained a shadow in the kitchen, making coffee and washing spoons. The funeral itself was a blur of damp wool and lilies. I sat in the front row, staring at the 2 mahogany boxes, feeling a numbness so profound it frightened me. Caroline sat beside me, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief that remained pristine. She wailed at the right moments, a tasteful melodic sound that drew comforting touches from the congregation. I could not cry. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside and scooped away my ability to react. It was at the reception afterward, held in the church basement with its fluorescent lights and smell of stale coffee, that the first crack appeared in the performance. I had stepped away from a suffocating conversation with Mrs. Higgins, our next-door neighbor, to find a trash can for my paper plate. The hallway behind the kitchen was quiet, shadowed by stacks of folding chairs. I heard Caroline's voice, sharp and distinct, lacking the tremolo of grief she had used in the sanctuary. "Did you get the packet?" she asked. I froze. There was a pause. And then a man's voice, hushed and urgent. I recognized him as the junior director from the funeral home. "It was delivered this morning. Caroline." "But the date on the notary stamp?" "It is fine," Caroline cut in, her voice dropping to a hiss. "It is just paperwork. Do not make this complicated. The courier picked it up an hour ago. Just file your portion and invoice me directly. Do not send anything to the house address." I stepped around the corner. Caroline and the man jumped apart like teenagers caught smoking. The man looked flushed, clutching a clipboard to his chest. Caroline smoothed her skirt, her face rearranging instantly into a mask of weary sadness. "What paperwork?" I asked. My voice sounded rusty. Caroline blinked, then offered that pitying smile. "Oh, Bella, you startled me. It is just administrative details for the cemetery. Permits for opening the ground twice in 1 month. It is incredibly boring and grim. I did not want to upset you with the red tape. The funeral director nodded too quickly. Standard procedure. Ms. Watson. I looked at them both. My father had been meticulous about paperwork. He had prepaid for the plots 10 years ago. I remembered seeing the certificates in the fireproof box in his study. I thought Dad took care of the plots. I said. Caroline sighed, stepping forward to link her arm through mine. He tried. Sweetie. But regulations change. Come on. Mrs. Higgins was asking where you went. You know how she gets when she feels ignored. She steered me back toward the noise of the reception. Her grip on my arm firm, almost bruising. I let her move me, too exhausted to argue. But the phrase stuck in my mind like a burr. Urgent notarized packet. You do not notarize cemetery permits on the morning of a funeral. 2 days later, the numbness began to wear off, replaced by a dull, aching need for sleep. I had been staying at the house, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom with its faded yellow wallpaper. Caroline had gone back to her own house across town, saying she needed to check on her husband and decompress. I went out in the morning to buy milk and coffee filters. The air was crisp, the sky a harsh, unyielding blue. I drove my rental car around the town I had spent 18 years trying to escape, feeling the ghostly overlay of memory on every corner. When I returned an hour later, I parked in the driveway and walked up the front steps, juggling the paper bag and my purse. I slid my key into the front door lock. It went in halfway and stopped. I frowned, jiggling it. The mechanism felt wrong, stiff. I pulled it out and tried again, shoving harder. Nothing. The key would not turn. I stepped back and looked at the brass hardware. It looked shinier than I remembered. New, panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my chest. I walked around to the back door, the one off the kitchen that we always left unlocked during the day. Locked. I tried the key there. It did not fit. I circled the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The windows were all shut tight, the blinds drawn. I went back to the front porch, and that was when I saw it, taped inside the brass mail slot. Visible only when I lifted the flap was a white envelope with my name typed on the front. I ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. Bella, I know you are grieving, and I want to help you move forward. Staying in the house is not healthy for you right now, and legally, you have no right to live there. I have secured the property for the estate. Please do not attempt to enter. I have scheduled a window for you to pick up approved belongings on Friday between 10 in the morning and noon. Do not make a scene. This is for the best. Love, Caroline. I stared at the paper. The words swam. No right to live there. Secured the property. I pounded on the door. Caroline, I shouted. I knew she wasn't there, but I shouted anyway. Caroline, open this door. My clothes are in there. Silence answered me. The house, my house, stood mute and hostile. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. I called her husband. Voicemail. I stood on the porch of the house where I had learned to walk, holding a bag of milk, locked out by my own sister while the funeral flowers were still fresh on the graves. Mrs. Higgins was watching from her garden next door. I could feel her eyes on my back. I turned, feeling the heat flood my face, and walked back to my car. I did not know what else to do. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation and logistics. I had to check into an extended stay motel on the highway, a place that smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and despair. I had to buy fresh underwear and a toothbrush from a drugstore because everything I owned was locked inside that house. When Friday came, I returned to the house at 10 o'clock sharp. I expected to find Caroline alone, perhaps ready to apologize, or at least explain. Instead, I found an audience. Caroline was there, standing on the porch with a clipboard, looking like a gatekeeper to a VIP club. But she wasn't alone. 2 of her friends, women I recognized from her Instagram feed, were hovering near the azalea bushes. They were holding their phones up, not quite pointing them at me, but clearly recording. "You are right on time," Caroline said, her voice bright and artificial. "The boxes are in the foyer. You have 2 hours." I walked up the steps, my hands clenched into fists. "Caroline, what is this? Why are they here?" "Support," she said vaguely. "We are just making sure everything goes smoothly." I stepped into the foyer. 4 cardboard boxes sat on the floor. That was it. "Where's the rest?" I asked. "The furniture? Mom's china? Dad's books? Those are part of the estate." Caroline said, "You are taking your personal effects. Clothes, toiletries, that old laptop." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were hard, flat stones. This wasn't grief. This was a hostile takeover. "I cannot believe you," I whispered. One of the friends drifted closer. Phone raised. "Oh, honey," she cooed, voice dripping with faux sympathy. "It is so hard to let go, isn't it? We are here for you." I realized then what was happening. They were filming a narrative. If I screamed, if I threw a box, if I cried, I would be the unstable younger sister crashing the funeral aftermath. Caroline would be the saint who held it together. They were careful not to catch my face clearly, framing me from the back or the side, turning me into a nameless figure of drama. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I would not give them the show. I picked up the first box. It was heavy. I carried it down the steps, past the watching neighbors, past the recording phones, and loaded it into my rental car. I did it 4 times. I did not speak. I did not look at them. I focused on the rhythm of my breathing, in, out. When the last box was in the trunk, I turned to Caroline. She was checking her watch. "Is that it?" she asked. "I want to see the will," I said quietly. Caroline's smile did not waver, but the corners of her eyes tightened. "Everything is being filed with the probate court. Bella, you can request a copy through the proper channels." I got in my car and drove away. As I turned the corner, I saw her high-five one of the friends. I spent the afternoon in the motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper. My credit card was near its limit. I had maxed it out on the flight home, the rental car, and the unpaid leave from my job. I had $300 in my checking account. I could not afford a legal war. I opened my laptop and tried to navigate the county probate website. It was a labyrinth of broken links and legal jargon. I finally found the docket search. A case had been opened 3 days before my father died. 3 days before. I sat back, my heart thumping. How could a probate case be opened before the death? Unless it wasn't a probate case for death, but for something else. Conservatorship? Power of attorney? I called the clerk's office. A woman with a tired voice told me that the file was sealed temporarily pending an inventory review, but that the executor was Caroline Watson Miller, represented by the firm of Sterling Vance. I knew that name. It was a boutique firm in the city. Known for high-asset divorces and aggressive estate planning, they were expensive. How was Caroline paying for them? Our parents were comfortable, retired teachers with a good pension and a paid-off house, but they weren't wealthy. I felt a wave of nausea. I lay down on the lumpy mattress and pulled out my phone. I started scrolling back through my text history with my father. Most of our messages were mundane. Photos of his garden, questions about my job, but then I noticed something I had glossed over in the chaos of his illness. 2 months ago. Bella, send me your current mailing address again. The one where you actually get mail, not just the apartment box. I had sent it. A week later. Did you get a large envelope? I had replied, "No." "Dad, what did you send?" He never answered that text. The next messages were about Mom's blood pressure, and then the silence of the hospital. I sat up. I dragged my suitcase, the one I had lived out of for the last month, onto the bed. I unzipped the lining. I checked the pockets. Nothing. Then I gathered the clothes I had just rescued from the house. I started shaking them out. Maybe he hid something in my old room? Nothing. I sat amidst the pile of clothes, defeated. I picked up the suitcase again to toss it to the floor, and I heard a slide. A faint, papery sound. I froze. I ran my hand along the inner lining of the suitcase lid. There was a zipper I had never used, meant for documents. I unzipped it. Inside was a generic greeting card. A condolence card. The kind you buy in a multi-pack at a grocery store. It was sealed. My hands shook as I tore it open. There was no money inside, no long letter, just one line, scrawled in my father's distinct, shaky handwriting, the handwriting of a man whose hands were failing him. Don't sign anything you didn't read twice. There was no signature, no date. But it was him. He must have slipped it into my suitcase when I visited 3 months ago. Or maybe he gave it to someone to put there? No. I had this suitcase with me at the funeral. Had he put it there before he died? No. He was in the hospital. I looked at the card again, a condolence card. He had bought a sympathy card for his own death to give me a warning. The absurdity and the horror of it made me laugh. A sharp, jagged sound that turned into a sob. He knew. He knew something was wrong. My phone buzzed. It was Caroline. I wiped my face and answered. "Hello? Bella?" she said. Her voice was softer now, devoid of the audience. "I am sorry about earlier. I know that was harsh. I am just under so much pressure with the estate." I didn't answer. "Look, I want to make this easier for you," she continued. "I know you are struggling with money. I know the flight was expensive. What do you want?" "Caroline, I have drawn up a simple waiver. Since the house is the only real asset, and it has a lot of maintenance debt attached to it. It is more of a burden than a gift. I am willing to take on that burden. If you sign a waiver acknowledging that I am the sole administrator and beneficiary of the real estate, I can release a cash gift to you from the life insurance immediately." "How much?" I asked. $10,000. It would clear your cards. Bella, you could go back to the city and start fresh. No lawyers, no fighting, no waiting for probate which could take years. $10,000. The house was worth at least $400,000. I clutched the card in my hand. "Don't sign anything you didn't read twice. I am not signing anything." I said. Caroline's sigh was audible. "Bella, be reasonable. Send me the will, Caroline, and the deed, and the insurance policies." The tone shifted instantly. The sisterly warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, metallic edge. "You are making a mistake," she said. "You are going to bankrupt yourself trying to fight me, and you will end up with nothing. I am trying to protect you. You are trying to buy me off. I am following the law. Bella, if you want to play games, talk to my lawyer, but do not come back to the house. You are trespassing if you step foot on the driveway." She hung up. I stared at the phone. My hands were trembling, but not from grief anymore, from anger. The next morning, I found a lawyer, not a high-powered shark like Sterling Vance, but a solo practitioner named Mr. Henderson, who worked out of a converted storefront near the train station. He wore a cardigan and his office smelled of peppermint tea and old paper. I told him everything. The locks, the note, the filming, the offer, the card from my father. He listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I will be blunt with you. Ms. Watson," he said. His voice was gravelly. "You are in a bad spot. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and your sister has possession. If she is the executor named in the will, she has broad powers, but the house is part of the estate, unless the deed says otherwise." He interrupted. "If the deed was joint tenants with rights of survivorship between your parents, it went to your father when your mother died. When he died, it went to his estate. If the will leaves it to her, or gives her discretion to distribute assets, she can take it. But she offered me money to sign a waiver. Why would she do that if the will already gives her everything? Mr. Henderson pointed a pen at me. That is the million-dollar question. If her legal standing was ironclad, she would not need your signature. She needs you to waive something, which means you have a claim. So we fight?" He sighed. "We can, but fighting costs money. Retainers, court fees, filing fees. Sterling Vance will paper us to death. They will file motion after motion until you run out of cash. So I just let her steal it? No, we get smart." He ripped the page off his pad. "We need information before we file a lawsuit. We need the full probate file, not just what she tells you. We need the history of the deed. We need to know if there are liens, mortgages, or trusts. You need to go to the county recorder's office. You need to become an investigator." He leaned forward. "And you need to figure out why she is in such a rush. People who are secure in their inheritance wait for the ink to dry. People who are scared move fast." I left his office with a to-do list and a lighter wallet. I had paid him $200 for the consult, leaving me with barely enough for gas and food. I had one more thing to do before I left town. I had to go back to the house. I knew Caroline had threatened me with trespassing, but I also knew Caroline. She had a spinning class on Saturday mornings at 10. She would be at the gym, showing off her grief abs. I drove to Elm Street. I parked 3 houses down. I didn't go to the front door. I walked through Mrs. Higgins's side yard. She waved at me from her window, confused but not hostile, and slipped through the hedge into our backyard. I went to the basement bulkhead doors. They were old, wooden, and usually padlocked. The padlock was there, but it was brand new. I knelt down, looking at the frame. The wood around the hasp was splintered, as if someone had pried the old lock off in a hurry. I pressed my face against the crack between the doors, trying to see into the gloom of the basement. I couldn't see much, just the concrete steps and the bottom of the inner door. But then I saw the door frame of the inner door, illuminated by a shaft of light coming from the basement window. There was a patch of wall right next to the door frame. It was a slightly different shade of gray than the rest of the foundation. Fresh paint. I squinted. The paint looked wet, or at least, very recent. Why would anyone paint a 2-foot square patch of concrete in a damp basement during the week of a funeral? It looked like someone had covered something up. A stain, water damage, or a hole. I remembered my father's safe. He had a small wall safe installed years ago, but I thought it was in the study upstairs. Had he moved it? Or was there something else? I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture through the crack in the doors. The flash reflected off the glass, but I got the shot. The gray patch stood out like a bruise. A car door slammed in the driveway. I froze. Caroline was early. I scrambled back through the hedge, heart pounding in my throat, tearing my stockings on a branch. I made it to Mrs. Higgins's yard just as I heard the front door of my parents' house open. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove. The image of that fresh gray paint burned into my mind. Caroline was hiding something, and she was terrified I would find it. I touched the pocket where I kept my father's card. Don't sign anything. I wouldn't. I was going to read everything. Starting now. My return to the city did not feel like a homecoming. It felt like a retreat into a bunker. I rented a studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents called up and coming and everyone else called industrial. It was a single room with a kitchenette squeezed into a closet, a bathroom where my knees touched the tub when I sat on the toilet, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It cost $1,200 a month, which was more than half my take-home pay from my logistics job. I needed money, but more than that, I needed distraction. I took a second job working evenings at a copy center 3 blocks away. It was mindless work, feeding paper into machines, binding presentations for exhausted architects, and laminating menus for local diners. The hum of the printers was soothing. It drowned out the loop of memories playing in my head, the sound of dirt hitting the casket, the click of the lock refusing my key, the pity in the neighbor's eyes. I lived on rice, beans, and the discount day-old sandwiches from the deli downstairs. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I stopped going out for drinks with friends. I told everyone I was taking time to process my grief. Which was true, but incomplete. I was not just processing grief. I was processing a crime scene. Every night, after my shift at the copy center, I sat at my wobbly card table and opened my laptop. I did not have the money to sue Caroline, but I had time, and I had the stubborn patience of someone who has been underestimated for 3 decades. I started requesting records. I did it the slow, cheap way. I sent certified letters to the county recorder, the probate court, and the tax assessor. I included check after check for $5, $10, $20, paying for copy fees and postage. I learned that bureaucracy is not malicious, but it is heavy. It moves at the speed of a glacier. 3 weeks into my new life, I received my first response. It was not from the county. It was from Sterling Vance. The envelope was thick, creamy linen paper that felt expensive to the touch. Inside was a letter signed by a junior associate named Marcus Thorne. Dear Ms. Watson, it has come to our attention that you have been making repeated inquiries regarding the estate of Robert and Ellen Watson. As you have been previously informed, your sister, Caroline Watson Miller, is the appointed executrix. Your continued attempts to circumvent the proper channels are causing unnecessary distress to our client during this difficult time. Please consider this a formal request to cease harassing the estate. All future inquiries must be directed to this office. I read the letter twice. Harassing the estate. I had sent 3 form letters requesting public records. They were trying to scare me. They wanted me to feel small, effectively reminding me that they were the adults in the room and I was the unruly child. I taped the letter to the wall above my desk. It was my first trophy. If they were watching me closely enough to know I had requested a tax transcript, then I was already a threat. 2 days later, the actual documents began to arrive. The first packet was from the county recorder. It contained the deed history of the house. I spread the papers out on my bed, smoothing the creases. There was the original deed from 30 years ago. When my parents bought the house, there was the mortgage satisfaction document from 10 years ago, a celebratory piece of paper that meant they owned it free and clear. Then, there was a third document. It was dated 2 years ago. A home equity line of credit, secured by the property. The lender was not a major bank. It was a company called Apex Capital Funding. I had never heard of them. The amount was for $150,000. I stared at the number. $150,000. My parents lived simply. They drove a 10-year-old sedan. They vacationed at a state park. Their pension covered their bills. Why would they borrow against their paid-off house 2 years before retirement? I turned the page. The signatures were there. My mother's looping script. My father's jagged, heavy hand. They looked real enough. But then my eyes caught something on the rider attached to the back of the loan document. It was an insurance waiver. A standard form declining credit life insurance. At the bottom, under the borrower names, was a section for secondary contact. Typed there was Bella Watson, and next to it, a phone number. My old landline number from 5 years ago. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I had not lived in that house for a decade. I had not used that phone number in 5 years. And I certainly had not been present at a closing table 2 years ago to agree to be a contact. Someone had used my name as a placeholder, a dummy variable to fill a blank space. I took a picture of the page and uploaded it to a cloud drive I had named The Bunker. The next day, I called in sick to my logistics job. I couldn't focus on shipping routes when my family history was being rewritten. I drove 3 hours back to the county seat, avoiding my hometown, heading straight for the Hall of Records. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a skepticism that seemed etched into her features. Her name tag said, Mrs. Gable. I need to see the original book, I said, sliding the copy of the deed across the counter, the one this was scanned from. She looked at me over her glasses. We do not usually pull the books. Hun, the digital copy is official. Please. I said, I think there is a mistake. She sighed. The heavy sigh of a woman who has heard every story in the book, but she disappeared into the back. She returned 10 minutes later with a massive, leather-bound volume. She flipped the heavy pages until she found the entry. I looked at the wet ink signatures. They looked the same as the scan. Mrs. Gable watched me. You looking for a forgery? She asked. Her voice was low. I don't know. I admitted. My parents didn't need this money. They were debt-free. Why would they do this? Mrs. Gable looked around the empty office, then leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Honey, in my experience, people do not refinance their paid-off home right before retirement unless 2 things are happening. 1, they are sick and insurance won't cover it. Or 2, they are scared. Scared of what? I asked. Debts they can't talk about. Or people pushing them. She tapped the page with a manicured fingernail. Look at the lender. Apex Capital. That is not a bank. That is private money, hard money, high interest, fast cash. You go to them when the banks say no. Why would the banks say no to them? They had perfect credit. Exactly. Mrs. Gable said. She pulled the book back. If I were you, I would find out who notarized this. See, right here. The stamp is blurry, but the commission number is clear. You can request the notary log for that specific date. Every notary has to keep a journal of who stood in front of them, what ID they showed, and what time it happened. Can I get that here? No. You have to write to the Secretary of State or find the notary yourself. But if you find that log, you find the truth. I thanked her, my hands shaking as I gathered my things, as I walked away. She called out softly, "Good luck, dear. Do not let them bury you." I drove back to the city in silence, the wheels humming against the pavement, hard money, scared. My father wasn't a scared man. He was the man who chased raccoons out of the attic with a broom. He was the man who stood up to the school board when they tried to cut the art program. But in those last 2 years, our phone calls had been shorter. He had sounded tired. I had assumed it was age. I had been so busy with my own career, my own desire to build a life away from Caroline's shadow, that I hadn't listened to the silence between his words. I needed to understand the weapon that had been used against them. I found a flyer at the library for a free financial literacy workshop titled Understanding Debt and Inheritance. It was held in the basement of a community center on a rainy Tuesday night. The coffee was terrible, and the chairs were plastic, but the information was gold. I sat in the back, taking notes in a spiral notebook. I learned about liens. I learned about balloon payments, loans where you pay only interest for years, and then the entire principal comes due at once, crushing you if you can't refinance. I learned that probate is a public process, but trusts are private. I learned that chaos is a strategy. My sister thrived in chaos. She used emotional outbursts and flurry of activity to distract people from the details. She had done it at the funeral. She was doing it now. I decided to do the opposite. I would be order. I went to an office supply store and bought a 3-ring binder, heavy-duty tab dividers, and a pack of color-coded highlighters. Red for debt, green for assets, yellow for inconsistencies, blue for communication with Caroline and her lawyers. I started printing everything, every email, every text, every document I had received. I punched holes in them and filed them. I created a timeline on the first page. 2 years ago. HELOC recorded. Apex Capital. 18 months ago. Dad asks for my address. 1 month ago. Mom dies. 3 weeks ago. Dad dies. 2 weeks ago. Probate opened by Caroline. As I organized, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was not grief. This was logistics. I was good at logistics, but the emotional toll was waiting for me in the quiet moments. Late at night, scrolling through my phone, I would see the notifications. Caroline posted constantly. She had turned our parents' death into a content farm. I clicked on a photo she had posted that morning. It was a selfie of her, looking somber but perfectly lit, standing in our parents' garden. She was holding a basket of hydrangeas. The caption read, "Doing the hard work today, clearing out the garden." Mom loved so much. It breaks my heart to see how neglected things got in the end. I promise to protect your legacy. Mom and Dad, even when others just walk away. The comments were a river of sympathy. You are so strong. Caroline, I cannot believe you have to do this alone. Where is your sister? Caroline had replied to that one. Bella handles things differently. She needs her space. We are just hoping she finds some stability. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Unstable. That was the narrative she was building. Bella the flake. Bella the one who ran away. Bella who couldn't handle the real world. It was the same dynamic we had as children, playing out on a digital stage. I closed my eyes and I was 10 years old again. We were in the living room. Caroline had broken a vase, Mom's favorite blue glass vase. She had been dancing, twirling with a scarf, demanding everyone watch her performance. Her arm had swung out, and crash. When Mom ran into the room, Caroline was already crying. "Bella bumped me," she wailed. "I was just dancing for you, Mommy." And Bella pushed me. I had stood there, mute with shock, holding the dustpan I had instinctively grabbed to clean up the mess. I didn't defend myself. I just swept up the glass. I took the blame because it was faster than fighting the performance. Caroline got a hug for being scared. I got a lecture about being careful. She didn't just want the vase then, and she didn't just want the house now. She wanted the story. She wanted to be the hero, which required me to be the villain or the victim. She couldn't exist without that contrast. I opened my eyes. I took a screenshot of the post. I printed it out. I punched holes in it. I filed it under blue. I would not comment. I would not feed the beast. I would just document the bite marks. A week later, I was searching through my old email archives, looking for a receipt for a birthday gift I had sent Dad years ago, hoping to find a credit card number he used. I didn't find the card, but I found a forwarded email from 6 months prior. It was from Dad. The subject line was empty. The body of the email was just an attachment, a PDF receipt. I opened it. It was a quarterly invoice for a self-storage unit at a facility called Secure Keep, located in the next town over from my parents. The bill was paid. The account holder was Robert Watson. I checked the date. He had paid for a full year in advance. The unit was paid up until next March. Why did my parents have a storage unit? They had a massive house with a basement and an attic. They were not hoarders. They were decluttering. I grabbed my car keys. I drove out on a Sunday, when I knew the traffic would be light. I wore sunglasses and a hat, driving my nondescript rental car. I felt like a spy in my own life. Secure Keep was a sprawling complex of orange metal doors and barbed wire fences. I parked in the visitor lot and walked into the office. The air conditioning was freezing. A teenager with acne and a bored expression sat behind the counter. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "My father rented a unit here. He passed away recently, and I need to check if we need to clear it out." "Name?" the kid asked, not looking up from his phone. "Robert Watson, Unit 402. He typed on his keyboard. "Yup, paid through March." "Great. I lost the key code. Can you give it to me?" He finally looked up. "You on the list?" "I am his daughter, Bella Watson." He squinted at the screen. "I got a Robert Watson, and I got an executor listed on the file. Caroline Watson Miller." My heart sank. "Is my name there?" "Nope, just Caroline. And the note says, 'No access without executor present.'" He looked at me suspiciously. "You got ID?" I realized I was pushing my luck. "No, I left it in the car. I will just call my sister." I walked out, my pulse thumping in my ears. "No access without executor present." That wasn't a standard note. That was a specific instruction. Caroline had been here. She knew about the unit, which meant whatever was in there, she controlled it. Or did she? If she had emptied it, she would have closed the account to get the refund. The fact that it was still active meant she was keeping it. Maybe she was storing things there she didn't want in the house, or maybe she didn't have the key either, and she had locked it down so no one else could get in while she looked for it. I walked back to my car, frustrated. I was hitting walls everywhere. The house, the bank, the storage unit, every door was locked, and Caroline held the key ring. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the rows of orange doors. Somewhere in there was a piece of the puzzle. I could feel it. My phone buzzed in my lap. I looked down. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was local to my parents' town. I opened the message. "Your sister didn't win the house. The house won her. Stop before you get hurt." I stared at the screen. The words seemed to vibrate. It wasn't a threat of violence. It sounded like a warning about a contagion. "The house won her." I typed back. "Who is this?" The response was immediate. "Ghost." Then nothing. I called the number. It rang once, then disconnected. "The number you have reached is not in service." A burner app. I looked back at the storage facility, then at the gray sky. I shivered. I wasn't just fighting my sister anymore. I was fighting something that had already swallowed her whole. I put the car in gear and drove back to the city, the anonymous text glowing on my passenger seat like a radioactive isotope. I added a new tab to my binder that night, black, for the unknown. It took exactly 365 days for the official probate inventory to land in my mailbox, in the grand grinding machinery of the legal system. A year is considered a reasonable time frame for an estate to settle. But for me, it was a year of holding my breath. I had spent 12 months living in my studio apartment, working 2 jobs, and feeding the color-coded binder that sat on my desk like a sleeping beast. When the envelope finally arrived from Sterling Vance, it was heavy. I cleared my table, pushing aside the remains of my dinner, and laid the document out under the harsh light of my desk lamp. I didn't read it like a daughter looking for sentimental heirlooms. I read it like an auditor. The inventory was a spreadsheet of a life reduced to numbers. Furniture and household goods, $3,000, 2014 Toyota Camry, $6,500, real property, $420,000. Then came the liabilities. I ran my finger down the list of debts. There were the usual things: final utility bills, a small credit card balance my mother used for groceries. But then, tucked between the funeral expenses and the legal fees, was a line item that stopped me cold. Personal loan repayment, $25,000. There was no creditor name listed, just personal loan, and the number was round, perfectly round. Real debts are rarely round numbers. They are messy things like $24,982.16. A flat $25,000 didn't look like a debt. It looked like a payoff. I flipped through the appendix, looking for the supporting documentation. For every other debt, there was a photocopy of a bill or a statement. For the personal loan, there was nothing, just the line item, asserting its own existence without proof. I highlighted it in yellow. Inconsistency. Then I went back to the unknown lender on the deed I had found months ago, Apex Capital Funding. I had been tracking them quietly, mapping their digital footprint. They didn't have a consumer-facing website, just a holding page with a login portal. But I had cross-referenced their mailing address with state business filings. Apex Capital shared a registered agent and a suite number with an entity called Bright Harbor Renewal. I typed Bright Harbor Renewal into the search bar for the 100th time. This time, I went deeper. I dug into local municipal meeting minutes from towns adjacent to my parents'. I found a pattern. Bright Harbor would enter a historic neighborhood, usually one with older homeowners on fixed incomes, and suddenly, the code enforcement complaints would spike. Overgrown grass, peeling paint, uneven sidewalks, nuisance fines would pile up. Then, Bright Harbor would offer to buy the burdened properties for cash, often well below market value. They weren't just developers, they were predators who manufactured the distress they claimed to solve, and my parents had taken a loan from their financing arm 2 years ago. I needed to see them. I needed to see the faces behind the shell companies. The following Tuesday, there was a town council meeting in my parents' hometown. The agenda listed a presentation by Bright Harbor Renewal regarding a Main Street revitalization initiative. I requested a half-day off from the copy center. I drove to the town, but I didn't go to the house. I parked in the public lot behind the library and changed into a gray blazer and glasses I didn't need. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I wasn't Bella Watson, the grieving daughter. I was just another anonymous citizen concerned about zoning. The council chambers were packed. I sat in the back row, clutching a notebook. When the Bright Harbor representatives took the podium, the room shifted. They were slick, dressed in suits that cost more than my car. They projected slides of gleaming storefronts and happy families, using words like synergy and community uplift. The lead presenter was a man in his late 40s, tanned and fit, with a smile that showed too many teeth. He spoke with a practiced cadence, assuring the council that Bright Harbor respected the town's heritage. I squinted at him. He looked familiar. I had seen that face before, not on a billboard or a website. I had seen it in 3 dimensions. I closed my eyes, replaying the funeral reception, the church basement, the smell of stale coffee, Caroline holding court. There had been a man there, hovering near the beverage station. He had been helpful, handing out napkins, pouring wine for the elderly aunts. I had assumed he was one of Caroline's neighbors, or perhaps a colleague of her husband. I opened my eyes and looked at the nameplate on the projection screen. Stephen R. Keller, Director of Community Acquisition. The man who was now pitching a takeover of the town had been at my parents' funeral reception, pouring wine and acting like a friend of the family. He hadn't been there to mourn. He had been there to ensure his investment was secure. My stomach turned over. Caroline knew him. She knew him well enough to invite him to the most private day of our lives. I left before the QA session ended. Slipping out the side door, I couldn't breathe in there. The air felt thick with collusion. As I drove back to the city, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a photo of Caroline and me from 10 years ago, smiling on a beach. It was a lie of a photo now. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. I answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Caroline. Bella?" Her voice was tight, high-pitched. It lacked the smooth, condescending polish she usually wore like armor. "Where are you?" "I am at work." I lied. "Why?" I just had a weird feeling." She laughed, a brittle, cracking sound. "I have been so stressed with the estate closing. I wanted to check in. You haven't been talking to anyone, have you?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Talking to whom?" "Caroline?" "I don't know. Anyone. Old neighbors? Lawyers? People are so gossipy in that town. I heard someone was asking questions at the records office." I stayed silent. I let the silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable, forcing her to fill it. "It is just that we are so close to the end," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want this to be over. I want us to move on. You do want to move on, don't you, Bella? I want the truth. Caroline." There was a pause. Then the line went dead. She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. She was terrified. She knew I was circling, even if she couldn't see me. 2 days later, the piece of paper that would change everything arrived in my mailbox. It was the response from the Secretary of State's office. I had requested the notary log for the date the HELOC was signed, the loan from Apex Capital. It had taken months of processing, but here it was, a photocopy of a single page from a bound journal. I scanned the rows. The date was right, 2 years ago, May 12th. There were 2 entries for that afternoon. The first was Robert Watson. Identification, driver's license, signature, Robert Watson. It looked like my father's writing, jagged, heavy, a bit shaky, but the line below it stopped my heart. Name, Bella Watson. Identification, driver's license. Signature, Bella Watson. I stared at the signature. It was my name, but it was not my hand. My signature is fast, loopy, a relic of years signing shipping manifests. The B is big. The W is sharp. This signature was small. The letters were perfectly formed, round and hesitant. It looked like someone had drawn the name rather than written it. It looked like a child trying to copy a parent's handwriting, or an adult trying very hard not to look like themselves. I knew where I was on May 12th, 2 years ago. I was in Chicago for a logistics conference. I had credit card receipts to prove it. I was 500 miles away from that notary stamp. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle in my chest like a stone. This wasn't just unfair family dynamics anymore. This was a felony. I needed verification. I couldn't just walk into court and say, "That doesn't look like me." I needed science. I found a forensic document examiner online who offered preliminary opinion services for a flat fee. I scanned the notary log page and 3 samples of my actual signature from checks and contracts from that same year. I sent them off with $300, money I had earmarked for car insurance. The report came back in 48 hours. Summary of findings. The question's signature designated as Q1, Bella Watson on notary log, exhibits significant microscopic tremors and pen lifts consistent with slow imitation. The fluidity and speed derived from the known exemplars, K1 through K3, are absent. It is highly probable that Q1 was not authored by the writer of the known exemplars. Forgery. Someone had sat at a table, likely in my parents' house, presented a fake ID, or perhaps the notary was in on it, and signed my name to a $150,000 lien. Who? It wasn't my father. He wouldn't forge his daughter's name, and if he had been pressured to sign his own name, who pressured him? I looked at the personal loan in the probate file again. $25,000. Was that the kickback? Or was that money paid to silence someone? I needed to confront her, not over the phone. I needed to see her face when I said the word forgery. I texted Caroline. I am coming to town on Saturday. We need to talk about the notary log. She didn't reply. When I pulled up to the house on Saturday morning, Caroline's car wasn't there, but her husband's SUV was. Mark came out onto the porch as I walked up the driveway. He looked terrible. He had gained weight. His face was puffy, and he was wearing sweatpants at nearly noon, which was unheard of for him. Caroline isn't here, he said, crossing his arms. She had a migraine. She is lying down. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. Tell her to come out. Mark, I know about the signature. Mark flinched. A genuine, physical tic. He looked at the neighbor's house, then back at me. Bella, keep your voice down. Please, then let me in. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house smelled different. It didn't smell like my parents anymore, like lavender and old books. It smelled of bleach and something stale, like anxiety. The furniture was rearranged. There were boxes everywhere, but not packing boxes, inventory boxes, product. I walked into the kitchen. Mark followed me, rubbing the back of his neck. Where is she? I asked. She really is sick. Bella, all of this has destroyed her nerves. Good, I said. She forged my signature. Mark, or she had someone do it. That is fraud. Do you know what happens when I give this to the district attorney? Mark collapsed into a kitchen chair. He put his head in his hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he mumbled. What wasn't? The loan? Apex? Mark looked up, his eyes red. We were in trouble. Bella, the business, my consulting firm. I lost a big contract 3 years ago. We were drowning. Caroline didn't want anyone to know. She couldn't handle the idea of looking like we failed. I stared at him. So you went to Mom and Dad? Mark nodded. Caroline convinced them it was an investment, that we would flip a property and pay them back with interest. They trusted her, but the bank wouldn't give us the loan because our credit was shot. So we used their house. And my name? I asked, my voice trembling. Why is my name on it? The lender required it, he whispered, because you are an heir. They needed all potential heirs to sign off on the lien because of your parents' age. If they died, the lender wanted to make sure the house was clear collateral. So you signed for me. Mark looked away. Caroline said you wouldn't mind. She said you would want to help the family. She said she would fix it before you ever found out. He reached into a folder on the table and slid a document toward me. Just sign this. Bella, please. It is a family settlement agreement. It retroactively approves the actions of the executor. If you sign this, we can sell the house, pay off the Apex loan, and give you a share. We can make this go away. I looked at the document. It was a dense thicket of legalese, but the intent was clear. I, Bella Watson, hereby release all claims and indemnify the executor against any liability. I looked at Mark. You are asking me to become an accessory to your crime. We are behind on the payments. Bella, he burst out, slamming his hand on the table. The Apex loan. It is interest only. The rate adjusted last month. It doubled. We can't make the payments if we don't sell the house now. They take it. And then I understood. The urgent notarized packet at the funeral. The rush to change the locks. The no right to live there note. She wasn't trying to keep the house because she loved it. She was trying to keep the house because it was the only thing standing between her and financial ruin. She had used the house as collateral for her own debts, claiming it was secure because she controlled the estate. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a hostage. I stood up. The kitchen felt small, suffocating. I am not signing that. Mark, Bella, please. They will foreclose. You will get nothing. I don't care about the money, I said, and for the first time, I realized it was completely true. I care that you used me. I care that you lied to Dad while he was dying. I turned to leave. Mark called after me, his voice desperate. Bright Harbor isn't just a lender. Bella, you don't know who these people are. If the house goes to auction, it gets ugly. I walked out the door. I didn't look back at the window where I knew Caroline was probably watching from behind the curtains. I drove straight back to the city. I didn't go to my apartment. I went to the office of a new attorney I had researched, a man named David Chen, who specialized in real estate fraud. I sat in his glass-walled conference room and laid it all out. The binder, the color-coded tabs, the notary log, the handwriting analysis, the conversation with Mark. Mr. Chen listened without interrupting. He flipped through the notary log, then looked at the deed history. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Ms. Watson, he said, his voice measured, you have done incredible work here. Most people would have given up at the first letter from Sterling Vance. Can we sue them? I asked. Can we put them in jail? He leaned forward. Proving criminal fraud is a high bar. We would need to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. And your sister will argue that she had verbal permission, that she was acting as a proxy. It becomes a he said, she said, and with your parents gone. There are no witnesses to the conversation. He tapped the notary log. But this is procedural gold. A forged signature on a deed of trust renders the instrument voidable. If you didn't sign it, the lien might not be valid against your interest in the property. So we can stop them? We can stop the foreclosure, he said, or at least, we can freeze it. We can file an injunction. We can force Apex to show their hand. But I have to warn you, if we blow this up, the house might still be lost to pay legitimate debts of the estate. The legal fees will be immense. You might win the battle and lose the asset. I thought about the fresh paint in the basement. I thought about my father's card. Don't sign anything. I don't want the asset. I said, I want the record corrected. I want it known that I did not sign that paper. Mr. Chen nodded. Then we file. I went home to my bunker. I felt lighter, but also terrified. I had pulled the pin on the grenade. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't from Sterling Vance. It was from the county court. I opened it. Notice of default and intent to sell. The legal description of my parents' house was at the top. The borrower listed was the estate of Robert Watson. The amount due was $158,000. The lender was Apex Capital Funding. The notice was addressed to Caroline Watson Miller, executor, but down at the bottom, in the CC field, was my name. Copy to Bella Watson, interested party. I stared at the words, interested party, for a year. Caroline had tried to erase me. She had locked me out, edited me out of the narrative, and forged my name to make me a silent accomplice. She had tried to make me invisible, but the system had finally blinked. The foreclosure machine, in its blind, robotic efficiency, had acknowledged the one thing my sister refused to admit. I existed. I had a stake, and I was the only one who could stop what was coming. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the notice. I texted it to Mr. Chen with 3 words. It is time. 5 years is a long time to hold your breath. In the beginning. The anger was a sharp, jagged thing that woke me up at 3 a.m, but over time, as I built a life in the city, the anger cooled into something denser and more durable. I was 37 now. I had a title at my logistics firm, regional operations manager, and a bank account that no longer hovered near zero. I had friends who knew the broad strokes of my history but didn't look at me with pity. I had built a fortress of stability, automatic savings transfers, a mortgage on a small condo, Sunday dinners with a running club. I wasn't returning to my hometown to reclaim a childhood that was already gone. I wasn't going back to cry over the height marks on the doorframe or the rose bushes my mother tended. I was going back because the lie my sister had constructed was finally collapsing, and if I didn't control the demolition, the debris would bury us both. The drive down was different this time. I wasn't the scared, broke woman in a rental car. I was driving my own vehicle, a sensible sedan with leather seats. I had a briefcase in the passenger seat containing affidavits, a forensic handwriting report, and a court order. When I pulled up to the house on Elm Street, the first thing I noticed was the color. My parents had always painted the house a warm, buttery yellow with white trim. Now, it was a flat, lifeless gray. The shutters were black. The front door, once a welcoming oak, was painted a glossy, aggressively cheerful red. It looked like every other house flip on HGTV, generic, sterile, and cheap. I walked up the path. The azaleas were gone, replaced by low-maintenance decorative grasses. Caroline opened the door before I could knock. She looked thin. Not the Pilates-toned thin of 5 years ago, but a brittle, wire-hanger thinness. Her hair was lighter, bleached to a platinum blonde that washed out her complexion. "Bella," she said. She didn't hug me. She stood in the doorway, blocking the view inside. "You are early. I am on time. Caroline, we have a meeting with the mediator at 2. I wanted to see the house first." She hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in, but excuse the mess. We are staging it." I stepped inside. The mess was a lie. The house was aggressively tidy, but it felt wrong. The walls were all painted that same builder-grade gray. The carpet was new and smelled of chemicals. The furniture was minimal, rented staging pieces that didn't fit the scale of the rooms. "Where is Dad's desk?" I asked, looking at the empty corner in the study. "In storage," Caroline said quickly. "We needed to open up the flow. Buyers like open concepts." I walked into the kitchen. The counters were quartz, the cheap kind that stains if you leave a lemon on it too long. On the island, amidst a perfectly placed bowl of wax fruit, sat 3 prescription bottles. I glanced at the labels: anti-anxiety, sleep aids, high blood pressure. I looked at Caroline. She was picking at a loose thread on her sleeve, her eyes darting around the room, landing everywhere but on my face. "Everything is fine," she said, catching my look. "We just need to get the sale pushed through. The market is softening, and if we wait too long, we lose the equity. There is no equity." "Caroline," I said quietly. She stiffened. "Of course there is. The house is worth $600,000. The loan is only manageable." I walked over to the counter and picked up the foreclosure notice I had brought with me. It wasn't the one from 5 years ago. It was a new one, dated 3 weeks prior. "The loan is $158,000, I said, plus $40,000 in accrued interest and penalties, plus the $25,000 you owe the personal lender. You have been making interest-only payments for 5 years. You haven't touched the principal. And now the balloon is due." Caroline snatched the paper from my hand. "That is standard financing. We were going to refinance, but the rates went up. It is just bad timing. It is a trap," I said. "It was always a trap, and you walked right into it." We drove to the mediator's office in separate cars. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to choke on. The mediator was a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. On the other side of the table sat a representative from Apex Capital, a man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to my first lawyer, who wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We are simply enforcing the terms of the contract, Mr. Henderson said, tapping a thick file. The borrowers agreed to a 5-year interest-only period, followed by a balloon payment of the full principal. That date was 30 days ago. The payment was not received. We are initiating foreclosure to recover our asset." My attorney, David Chen, leaned forward. He had flown in for this. His presence changed the temperature in the room. The contract is based on a fraudulent instrument, David said calmly. We have provided the forensic report indicating that Bella Watson's signature on the deed of trust was forged. If one of the required signatories did not sign, the lien is invalid. Mr. Henderson didn't blink. That is a matter for a criminal court, not a foreclosure mediation. Our paperwork is in order. We have a notarized document, unless you have a judgment stating otherwise. We proceed, but we are willing to be generous, Henderson added. Turning his gaze to Caroline, he ignored me completely. If the estate signs a deed in lieu of foreclosure today, we will forgive the penalty fees. We will allow the estate to walk away with a small settlement. Say, $10,000? Caroline looked at him, her lips trembling. 10,000? But the house is... It is my parents' legacy. It is a distressed asset, Henderson said coldly. And frankly, Mrs. Watson-Miller, you have been difficult to work with. I watched the dynamic. Henderson wasn't negotiating. He was bullying. And then I noticed something on the bottom of his file folder. A logo. It was a small stylized lighthouse. The same logo I had seen on the Bright Harbor renewal pamphlets at the town council meeting years ago. I pulled out my phone under the table and did a quick search. I looked up the board of directors for Apex Capital. I had done this before, but names change. There it was. Stephen R. Keller, the man from the funeral. The director of community acquisition for Bright Harbor was now listed as a senior advisor for Apex Capital. I spoke up for the first time. Mr. Henderson, I said, does Stephen Keller know you are offering such a lowball number? Henderson's head snapped toward me. His eyes narrowed. Mr. Keller is not involved in day-to-day collections. Really? Because he seems very involved in this property. He was at the funeral. He is on the board of your company, and he is the face of the redevelopment group that has been fining my sister for code violations for the last 3 years. Caroline looked at me, shock registering on her face. What? I turned to her. You didn't tell me about the code violations. Caroline, the roof, the sidewalk, the blight notices? She flushed. Those were misunderstandings. They were pressure. I said, Apex lends the money. Bright Harbor reports the violations to the city. The city fines you. You get desperate. You can't refinance because of the fines. So Apex forecloses, and Bright Harbor buys it cheap at auction. It is a closed loop. Henderson stood up. This is a mediation, not a conspiracy theory convention. We have a default. We have a sale date scheduled for next month. You have until then to pay the full $158,000 or surrender the property. He walked out. The silence left behind was deafening. Caroline put her head on the table and began to weep. It wasn't the pretty yet theatrical crying of the funeral. It was the ugly, snotty sobbing of a woman who realizes she has been played. David packed up his briefcase. We need to file for an emergency injunction. He said to me, we have enough to allege predatory lending and conflict of interest. It might buy us time. Do it, I said. The retaliation was swift and dirty. 2 days after David filed the motion, a local news blog, which was little more than a Facebook page run by a friend of Bright Harbor, posted a story. Local woman tries to steal widow's home in inheritance dispute. The article didn't name me directly, but it gave enough details that anyone in town knew who it was. It claimed the estranged younger daughter was returning after 5 years of abandoning the family to sue her sister, who had selflessly cared for the dying parents. It mentioned that Caroline was a devoted wife, ignoring the fact that she wasn't a widow, and that I was trying to invalidate legitimate loans to grab cash. It was a narrative masterpiece. It took my absence, which Caroline had enforced, and turned it into a weapon. It took my attempt to stop the fraud and painted it as greed. I read the comments. Disgusting. Where was she when the mom was sick? Some people just want a payout. I sat in my hotel room, feeling the old humiliation rise up. They were doing it again, controlling the story, but I wasn't 10 years old anymore, and I wasn't 32. I took a screenshot. I sent it to David. Add defamation to the file. I typed. That night, Caroline came to my hotel. She didn't call first. She just knocked on the door at 9 o'clock. When I opened it, she pushed past me, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She looked frantic. "We need to fix this." "Bella," she said, uncorking the bottle with shaking hands. "This is getting out of control. That article. I didn't write it. I swear. I know you didn't," I said, leaning against the dresser. "You aren't smart enough to write that. That was corporate PR." She flinched, but poured the wine. "Look, Mark and we have been talking. We can make this work. If we sell the house ourselves, before the auction, we can get maybe $300,000. It is a fire sale, but it is better than foreclosure." "And?" I asked. "And the title company won't insure the title with your lawsuit pending. They are scared of the forgery claim." She took a large gulp of wine. "So, here is the proposal. You drop the lawsuit. You sign a document saying that you authorize the signature on the deed. Just retroactively. We sell the house. We pay off Apex. And whatever is left, maybe 100,000, maybe more, we split. 50-50? She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. $50,000. "Bella, that is 5 times what I offered you before. You can pay off your condo. You can take a trip. We can both walk away clean." I looked at her. I looked at the desperation etched into the lines around her mouth. She still thought this was about money. She thought everyone had a price because she had a price. "If I sign that," I said slowly, "I am admitting that I lied in my affidavit. I am admitting that the forgery was actually an authorized act. I would be perjuring myself to save you." "It is just paper," she cried. "It is just a formality to get the title clear. It is fraud." "Caroline," I shouted, "it is legitimizing fraud. You want me to help you cover up a crime so you can salvage a few scraps of dignity?" She slammed the glass down. Wine sloshed onto the generic hotel carpet. "Why do you care?" she screamed. "You hate that house. You hated growing up there. You left the second you turned 18. Why are you burning everything down just to prove a point?" "Because Dad didn't want this," I yelled back. "Because Mom didn't want this. Because you turned their life's work into a chaotic ATM for your husband's failed business." She glared at me, her chest heaving. Then she laughed, a cruel, low sound. "You think you know what Dad wanted? You weren't here, Bella. You were in the city, being important. You didn't see him at the end. He was scared. He was confused. He signed whatever I put in front of him because he trusted me. He didn't even read half of it." The words hung in the air. "He didn't even read half of it. My father, the teacher, the man who read the instruction manual for a toaster oven 3 times. "Get out," I said. Caroline stared at me, then grabbed her purse. "Fine. Let them take it. Let them take it all. But don't you dare come crying to me when you end up with nothing but legal bills." She stormed out. I locked the door and sank to the floor. I felt sick. She was right about one thing. I hadn't been there, and that guilt was the hook she had been using to drag me down for years. But I was here now. The next morning, I went to the neighborhood. I didn't go to the house. I went to Mrs. Higgins next door. She was older now, frail, sitting on her porch in a quilted jacket. She recognized me instantly. "Bella," she said, her voice reedy, "you look like your mother." I sat with her for an hour, drinking weak tea. I asked her about the last year of my parents' lives. She told me things Caroline hadn't. She told me about the men in suits who came to the door, Bright Harbor people, late in the evening. She told me about the city trucks that would park out front, measuring the sidewalk, taking photos of the gutter. They harassed him. Mrs. Higgins whispered, "Your father, he was a proud man." But they made him feel like a criminal. Every week, another letter, another fine. She leaned in. One day, he was out in the garden. He looked so gray. I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me and said, "I made a mistake. Martha, I made a mistake trusting the wrong person. And now I can't find the way out." "Who did he mean?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. But he wasn't looking at the men in suits when he said it. He was looking at his own house. I thanked her and walked away. Trusting the wrong person. It wasn't just the lenders. It was Caroline. He had trusted her to handle the pressure, and she had amplified it. I had one card left to play, the storage unit. I had tried to access it 5 years ago, but Caroline had locked it down. This time, I had a court order. David had petitioned the probate judge for limited access for the purpose of identifying sentimental personal property. The judge, annoyed by the conflicting filings, had granted me a 2-hour window, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. I met the monitor at Secure Keep. He was a bored, retired cop named Frank, who unlocked the orange door with a pair of bolt cutters because Caroline refused to provide the key code. The door rolled up with a screech of metal. The unit wasn't full of furniture. It wasn't a dumping ground. It was an archive. There were shelves lining the walls, holding plastic bins. Each bin was labeled in my father's handwriting. Taxes, 1990 to 2000. Medical records. House maintenance. It was meticulous. It was the work of a man who was trying to create order in a world that was spinning out of control. I started opening the boxes. I found copies of the Bright Harbor letters. He had kept every single one. He had circled the dates and the fines. In the margins, he had written notes. Called C. She says handle it. Cost $500. I found bank statements. I saw the withdrawals. Transfer to C. Miller. $2,000. Transfer to C. Miller. $5,000. She had been bleeding them dry long before the loan. Then, in the back of the unit, on a separate shelf, sat a small metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. Inside was a single manila envelope. On the front, written in thick black marker, were the words, "For Bella. Only if she locks you out." My breath hitched. He knew. He knew exactly what Caroline would do. Frank, the monitor, stepped closer. "Is that personal property?" "It is addressed to me," I said, my voice shaking. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things. First, a transcript of a voicemail. It was typed out on his old typewriter. Transcript of voicemail from Stephen Keller, April 14th. "Robert, we need the signature on the financing adjustment. Caroline tells us you are hesitating. Listen, we can make the code violations go away, but we need the collateral secured. If you don't sign, the city condemns the property. Think about Ellen. Do you want her moved to a state facility? Sign the papers. Your daughter says it is the only way." My hands trembled. They had threatened him with my mother's care. They had weaponized his love for her. Second, a letter, handwritten. "My dearest Bella, if you are reading this, then my fears have come true. I am sorry. I am so sorry I didn't call you. I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I let them scare me. I was ashamed that I let your sister talk me into circles until I didn't know which way was up. I signed the loan. Bella, I know I shouldn't have, but they said they would take the house. They said I was losing my mind. Caroline said she had a plan to pay it back in 6 months. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe she was the capable one, but I know she isn't, and I know she will try to keep you away because she is afraid of you. She has always been afraid of your truth. I cannot undo the loan, but I tried to create a failsafe. I didn't tell Caroline about this. She thinks she has everything. There is a trust amendment. I filed it with a lawyer in the next county, a man who doesn't play golf with the Sterling Vance crowd. It is dormant. It only activates if the executor, Caroline, attempts to sell the house under distress or excludes you from the premises. It moves the house into a distinct trust. It doesn't stop the debt. But it removes her authority, it appoints a trustee, and it names you the beneficiary of the residual. Not her. Fight her, Bella, not for the money, but for the fact that I didn't raise you to be a victim. I raised you to be the one who reads the fine print. Love, Dad. I lowered the letter. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast. I wiped them away with the back of my hand. He hadn't been weak. He had been cornered. But even in the corner, he had planted a seed. I looked at the third item in the envelope. It was a business card for an attorney named Samuel Roth, located in a town 40 miles away. On the back, Dad had written, code word, blue glass vase. I laughed, a choked, sobbing laugh. The blue glass vase, The one Caroline broke when we were kids. The one I took the blame for. He knew. He had always known. I stood up. I put the papers back in the envelope. Frank looked at me. "You okay, ma'am?" "I am better than okay." "Frank," I said, "I am armed." I walked out of the storage unit into the blinding afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David Chen. "Foreclosure hearing is set for Friday. The judge is skeptical of our injunction. We need something solid." I looked at the business card in my hand. "I have it." I typed back. "I have the nuclear option." I got in my car. I didn't drive back to the hotel. I drove toward the next county. I had a trust to activate. Samuel Roth's office was not in a glass tower. It was in a converted carriage house behind a bakery in a town 40 miles west of where my parents had died. It smelled of yeast and old law books, the leather-bound kind that people buy for aesthetics, but Samuel seemed to have actually read. He was a small man with eyebrows that looked like unruly hedgerows. When I placed the business card on his desk, the one with blue glass vase written on the back, he didn't look surprised. He just looked sad. He was a good man. "Robert," Samuel said, opening a fireproof file cabinet. A scared man, toward the end, but a good one. He pulled out a thick folder. "I need you to understand what this is." "Bella," he said, placing his hand on the file, "and what it is not. This amendment doesn't just hand you the deed to the house. Your father knew that if he simply willed the house to you, Caroline would challenge it. She would claim undue influence or incompetence. She would drag you through probate for a decade. So what does it do?" I asked. "It acts as a tripwire." Samuel said, "It is a conditional amendment to the family trust. It lay dormant as long as the executor, your sister, acted in accordance with her fiduciary duties. But it contains a specific clause, the Protection of Legacy Clause." He opened the file and pointed to a paragraph. "In the event that the executor attempts to alienate the primary residence under distress, restricts access to a lineal descendant without court order, or encumbers the property with debt exceeding 20% of its value without unanimous beneficiary consent, the executor's powers are immediately suspended." He looked up at me. "It triggers the appointment of an independent special trustee, me. And it grants me the power to audit every transaction, freeze every asset, and challenge any transfer made in bad faith. It doesn't give you the house, Bella. It gives you the truth, and it gives me the hammer to stop her from selling it." I felt a lump form in my throat. He didn't leave me the house. He left me a shield. We filed the motion to reopen the estate the next morning. David Chen, my city attorney, worked with Samuel Roth to draft the filing. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. We weren't just asking for a review. We were alleging breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and the existence of a superior testamentary instrument, the dormant trust. When the clerk stamped the papers, the sound echoed like a gunshot. By noon, the town was buzzing, in a place where everyone buys their coffee at the same 3 shops. Legal filings are not private. They are news. I walked down Main Street to get lunch, and I felt the eyes. 5 years ago, they had watched me carry boxes out of my childhood home, pitying the poor sister who got kicked out. Now, the gaze was different. It was wary. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the threat. I heard the whispers in the booth behind me at the diner. "That is her, the sister from the city. I heard she is suing Caroline for everything. After all Caroline did for those parents? That is cold." I drank my coffee and stared at the wall. Let them talk. They were reading a script Caroline had written. I was about to burn the screenplay, but I had one more errand to run. The trust amendment Samuel had shown me referenced a safety deposit box. It wasn't at a big bank. It was at a place called Alder Creek Cooperative. I looked it up. It was a tiny member-owned credit union that catered to farmers and trade unions. It was located in the basement of a VFW hall 3 towns over. My father had never been a farmer, and he wasn't a veteran. He had chosen it because it was off the grid. I drove there in the afternoon. The lobby was wood-paneled and silent. The teller was a woman who looked like she had been working there since the Carter administration. "I am here to access Box 402. I said, "I have the key." I held up the small brass key I had found in the manila envelope from the storage unit. The woman didn't reach for it. She peered at me over her bifocals. "The account holder is deceased," she said. "Access is restricted to the deputy. I am the deputy, Bella Watson." She checked a ledger, not a computer screen, a physical ledger. "Name matches," she said. "But there is a security instruction, a verbal verify." My heart hammered. Samuel hadn't mentioned a verbal code for the box, only the code for his office. I thought back to the outline of the trust. Instructions that require Bella's ID plus a specific phrase their father used in childhood, something Caroline would never know. I closed my eyes. I thought about the nights when I was 6 years old, terrified of the dark. Caroline would tease me, telling me there were monsters under the bed. But Dad would come in, sit on the edge of the mattress, and check the closet. Then he would turn to me, tap his nose, and say the same thing every single night. I looked at the teller. The phrase is, "Check the North Star." The woman's face softened. She closed the ledger. "He said you would remember." She said, she led me into the vault. It wasn't the gleaming steel vault of a movie bank. It was a room with rows of metal drawers that smelled of dust and copper. She unlocked box 402, then left me alone. I pulled the box out. It was light. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, just a black thumb drive and a single sheet of paper titled Disclosure Timeline. I unfolded the paper. It was a log, a play-by-play of the last 6 months of his life. January 12th. Meeting with S. Keller. He says the sidewalk repair is mandatory. Estimated cost, $8,000. I don't have it. February 4th. Caroline suggests the loan. She says she knows a guy. February 10th. The guy is Keller. I ask Caroline if she knows him. She says he is a friend of Mark's. March 1st. I tell Caroline I don't want to sign. She cries. She says I am putting Mom in danger. And then, at the bottom of the page, written in red ink, was a note. It wasn't a log entry. It was a message to me. "They will pressure your sister. She will fold. She has never been able to stand the silence. Bella, you can. That is why I had to keep you out. If you were here, you would have fought them, and they would have destroyed you too. I am letting her fold so you can survive to unfold it later." I stared at the words. I am letting her fold. He hadn't been tricked, not entirely. He had sacrificed the house and his own peace of mind to keep me out of the blast radius. He knew Caroline was the weak link. He knew she would break under Bright Harbor's pressure. If I had been there, I would have stood between her and the wolves would have eaten us both. He let her sell him out so that I would be angry enough to save us later. I pocketed the drive and the paper. I felt a strange, cold admiration for my father. He had played a long, terrible game. I drove back to my hotel. My phone was blowing up. 7 missed calls from David Chen. I called him back. "Where are you?" David asked. His voice was urgent. "I am coming back. I found the evidence. Forget the evidence for a second," he said. "We have a problem. Caroline knows about the filing. She is panicking." "What did she do?" "She entered into a contract to sell the house this morning. Cash offer. Quick close. $320,000. 300. That is half what it is worth. It is a liquidation sale. Bella. The buyer is an LLC called BHR Holdings. Bright Harbor Renewal." I said, "They are trying to wash the title. If they buy it before the hearing, they can claim they are bona fide purchasers for value. They can argue they didn't know about the trust. It complicates everything." "Stop it," I said. "I am trying." David said, "I am at the courthouse now. I am filing for a temporary restraining order based on the trust amendment. I need you here. I need the original trust document Samuel has. I am 10 minutes away. I drove like a maniac. I met David on the steps of the county courthouse. Samuel Roth was already there, looking like a badger ready for a fight. We went into the judge's chambers. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was a quiet, tense conversation over a mahogany desk. Judge Vance, no relation to Caroline's lawyers, read the trust amendment. He looked at the disclosure timeline I had found. He looked at the contract of sale Caroline had signed that morning. This looks like a fire sale. Mr. Chen, the judge said, peering over his glasses. It is a fraudulent conveyance. Your Honor, David said. The executor is attempting to liquidate the asset to avoid the oversight mechanism triggered by the trust. She is selling a $600,000 home for $300,000 to the very entity that holds the predatory debt. The judge signed the order. Temporary restraining order granted. Sale of property enjoined pending full hearing. We had stopped the bleeding, but the patient was still critical. That night, the cracks in Caroline's life finally split wide open. I was in my hotel room, organizing the exhibits for the upcoming hearing. I had the notary log, the handwriting analysis, and now the thumb drive from the safety deposit box. I plugged the drive in. It contained audio files, voice memos my father had recorded on his phone. There was a knock at the door. I expected Caroline again. I was ready to scream at her. But it was Mark. Caroline's husband looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His shirt was wrinkled, and he smelled of scotch. He didn't push past me. He stood in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding him up. She is packing, he said. What, Caroline? She is packing suitcases. She says we are going to Florida. She says if she leaves, they can't serve her. They have already served her. Mark, I said, running just makes it worse. It turns a civil case into a criminal flight. Mark laughed. A dry hacking sound. I told her that. She won't listen. She is terrified. Bella, you have to understand. She never wanted to hurt you. I looked at him. I saw the weakness that my sister had married. A man who wanted the lifestyle but couldn't handle the bill. She forged my signature. Mark, she stole my inheritance. She evicted me from my own home. How is that not wanting to hurt me? She was trying to save the image, Mark shouted, then lowered his voice as a guest in the hallway glanced at us. She was trying to save the image of the family. When your dad died, the debts were huge. The business debts, my debts. Your debts? I asked. Mark rubbed his face. I borrowed from them too, from Apex, before your parents did. I leveraged the business when I couldn't pay. They came to Caroline. They told her there was a way out. They said if she got your parents to take out a loan on the house, it would cover my business loan and give us operating capital. I stared at him. The horror of it was a physical weight. You Ponzi schemed my parents. I whispered. You used their house to pay off your bad business loans. We thought we could pay it back, Mark pleaded. We thought the market would turn. But then your mom got sick. And your dad. He started asking questions. So you forged my name. Mark nodded. Caroline said. She said if we asked you to sign, you would ask to see the books. You would see how deep in the hole we were. You would judge us. She couldn't handle your judgment. Bella, she would rather commit a felony than have you look at her like she was a failure. I opened the door wider. Come in, Mark. You are going to tell me everything, and then you are going to tell the lawyers. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed and spilled it all. He told me about the late-night meetings with Stephen Keller. He told me about the urgent packet at the funeral. It wasn't cemetery permits. It was a reaffirmation of debt that Keller forced Caroline to sign before the body was even in the ground. She didn't inherit the house. Mark said, his voice breaking, she inherited the foreclosure. She has been managing a corpse for 5 years, pretending it was alive. Where is she now? I asked. At the house, trying to find her passport. I left Mark in the hotel room. I told him to stay there. I drove to the house. It was midnight. The cheap solar lights Caroline had installed along the driveway cast a ghostly blue-white glow. The for sale sign in the yard had a pending sticker on it that David had legally invalidated hours ago. I used my key, the one I had made 5 years ago before she changed the locks, hoping the old lock was back. It wasn't. I pounded on the door. Caroline, I know you're in there. No answer. I walked around to the back. The kitchen light was on. I saw her shadow moving frantically. I picked up a garden stone. one of the river rocks she had used to replace Mom's azaleas, and smashed the glass of the back door window. I reached in, unlocked the deadbolt, and walked into the kitchen. Caroline screamed. She was standing over the island, an open suitcase filled with designer clothes. She dropped a stack of sweaters. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. "You broke the window. You broke the family." "Caroline, a window is the least of our problems." I walked over to the island. I slammed the disclosure timeline down on the quartz counter. "Read it," I said. She looked at the paper. She recognized Dad's handwriting. Her face went white. "Where did you get this?" "He left it for me. In a place you couldn't find because you don't know the password. Because you didn't listen to him when we were kids." Caroline stared at the paper. Her hands started to shake. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew everything." I said, "He knew you were bleeding him. He knew Mark was drowning. And he knew that if he told me, I would have come down here and torched your entire life to save him. I would have handled it," she yelled, her eyes flashing with that old, desperate arrogance. "I had a plan. Your plan was to forge my name and steal the house. My plan was to protect you," she screamed back. The room went silent. "Protect me?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "You locked me out. You humiliated me. You let the whole town think I was a greedy monster. How is that protection? Because Dad begged me to." She slumped against the counter, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her expensive sweaters. "He begged me." She sobbed. "The night before he died, he grabbed my hand. He said, 'Don't tell Bella about the money. Don't tell her about Mark. If she knows how bad it is, she will leave.'" I froze. "What do you mean? Leave?" He said. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. He said, "Bella is the strong one, but she has no roots here. If she sees this rot, she will fix it, and then she will walk away and never look back. She will cut us off. I can't lose her. Caroline, I can't have her hate me for being stupid." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Dad thought my independence was a rejection. He thought that because I had built a life away from his shadow, I was looking for an excuse to sever the tie. He thought my competence was a judgment, and you used that. I said, my voice trembled. "You used his fear of losing me to make sure he lost me." Caroline looked up. Her mascara was running down her face in black tracks. "I was jealous," she whispered. "I was so jealous. You were out there, free. You had your own money, your own life. I was stuck here, managing Mom's pills, managing Mark's failures, managing the house. I wanted to be the one he needed. I wanted to be the one who saved the legacy. So you became the villain instead. I didn't mean to be. I got in too deep. And then Stephen Keller said he could help, and it spiraled." She buried her face in her hands. I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't see the golden child anymore. I didn't see the socialite. I saw a woman who was drowning in her own choices, weighed down by a house that had consumed her. The deepest betrayal wasn't the theft. It wasn't the forgery. It was that she had taken the one thing I was proud of, my independence, and twisted it into a knife to cut me out of my father's heart. I walked over to her. I didn't hug her. I couldn't. Mark told me everything. I said, "He's going to testify." "Caroline." Her head snapped up. "No, he wouldn't. He already has." I turned to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small. "To finish this." I spent the next 2 days in a conference room at David Chen's office. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I channeled every ounce of my operational experience into building the case. I created binders. Exhibit A, the notary log, the physical proof of the crime. Exhibit B, the disclosure timeline, the proof of intent and coercion. Exhibit C, the Apex/Bright Harbor nexus. I mapped out the board of directors. I drew lines connecting Stephen Keller to the loan, to the code violations, to the cash buyer offer. Exhibit D, the social media campaign. I printed every post Caroline had made about protecting the legacy and juxtaposed them with the dates of the interest-only payments she missed. David watched me work. "You are terrifying. You know that?" he said, half joking. "Chaos is what she thrives in," I said, snapping a binder shut. "I am bringing order." My calm was my power. Caroline was emotional, reactive, frantic. I was inevitable. The night before the hearing, I went back to the house one last time. The TRO gave me the right to inspect the property with the trustee. Samuel Roth came with me, but he stayed on the porch to give me a moment. The house was dark. The power had been cut that morning. Another unpaid bill. I walked through the rooms with a flashlight. It felt empty. Not just devoid of furniture, but devoid of spirit. The ghosts had left. I went down to the basement. I shined my light on the concrete floor. It was swept clean. I walked to the back, to the bulkhead doors where I had seen the fresh paint 5 years ago. The gray patch was still there, but the paint had aged. It was peeling slightly at the edges. I knelt down. I ran my fingers over the rough concrete. There was an outline. A faint rectangular depression beneath the paint. It looked like a patch job. Someone had filled a hole and painted over it, but the edges were cracked. I pressed on the center of the patch. It felt solid, but when I tapped it with the heavy end of my flashlight, the sound changed. Thud, thud, hollow. It wasn't solid concrete. It was a cap. My heart started to race. Had Caroline found it? Had she opened the safe and taken whatever was inside? Or had she painted over it without ever opening it? I remembered the urgent notarized packet. I remembered her frenzy to get me out of the house. If she had found cash, she would have used it to pay the bills. She wouldn't be drowning. If she had found gold, she would have sold it. She hadn't opened it. She had hidden it. She had painted over the safe because she was afraid of what was inside. Or maybe because she was afraid I would find it. She didn't know the combination. She just knew it was there, and she wanted it erased. I stood up. Did someone already take what mattered most? Or was it still there, waiting for the daughter who knew how to listen? I didn't try to open it. Not yet. I needed the house to be secure first. I needed the judge to hand me the keys legally. I walked back up the stairs, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. Tomorrow. We went to court. Tomorrow. I would strip my sister of her title and her power. Tomorrow. I would reclaim the truth. But tonight? I knew something she didn't. The house still had secrets. And unlike Caroline, I wasn't afraid of them. The morning of the hearing was not bright and sunny. It was overcast. A ceiling of slate-gray clouds that pressed down on the county courthouse like a heavy hand. I liked it that way. Sunlight would have felt false. This was a day for gray areas, for the murky waters where law and family betrayal mix until you cannot tell them apart. I arrived 30 minutes early. I wore a navy blazer and slacks, the same outfit I would wear to a quarterly business review. I carried 2 banker's boxes filled with color-coded binders. I did not look like a grieving daughter. I looked like an auditor coming to shut down a failing branch. Caroline arrived 10 minutes later. She stepped out of Mark's SUV, wearing a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was blown out to perfection. Her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing pearl earrings that I recognized as our mother's. She was projecting control. She was trying to look like the responsible executrix, the pillar of the community who was being harassed by a greedy, estranged sibling. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way her hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt. I saw the way she didn't look at the courthouse doors, but rather through them. Her eyes glassy and unfocused. She wasn't a pillar, she was a facade, held together by hairspray and denial. We entered courtroom B. It smelled of lemon polish and old anxiety. Judge Vance sat on the bench, a man with a face like a carved rock and reading glasses perched precariously on his nose. He didn't look up when we entered. He was reading a file. My file. The players took their seats. On the left, Caroline and her attorney from Sterling Vance, a slick man named Mr. Sterling Jr. who checked his watch 3 times in the first minute. Next to them, representing the estate, but really representing his own interests, was the counsel for Bright Harbor and Apex Capital, a man with a shark smile named Mr. Thorne, on the right. There was just me, David Chen, and Samuel Roth. We didn't have a team of paralegals. We had the truth, stacked in 3-inch binders. The judge cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged room. We are here on an emergency motion to remove the executor and enjoin the sale of the property at 42 Elm Street, Judge Vance said. His voice was dry, bored. I have read the filings. I have read the allegations of fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. These are heavy charges. Miss Watson, I hope you have more than resentment to back them up. David stood up. He buttoned his jacket. We do, Your Honor. We are not here to litigate family grievances. We are here to establish a pattern of predatory financing, facilitated by an executor who has systematically looted the estate and is now attempting to liquidate the primary asset to cover her own malfeasance. He walked to the podium. Exhibit A, David said, the notary log. From May 12th, 2 years ago, it shows a signature attributed to Bella Watson. We have submitted a forensic analysis from a certified document examiner stating that this signature is a forgery. My client was in Chicago on that date. Mr. Thorne, the Bright Harbor lawyer, stood up. Objection. The forensic report is an opinion, not a fact, and even if the signature is irregular, Ms. Watson may have given verbal authorization. This is a case of loss, Your Honor. The plaintiff waited 5 years to bring this up. She is only here now because there is equity to be claimed. This is a cash grab by a daughter who abandoned her parents and now wants a payout. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't move. I kept my hands folded on the table. Abandoned. That was their word. It was the weapon they used to discredit my witness. David didn't flinch. Ms. Watson did not abandon her parents, he said calmly. She was systematically excluded, and we can prove why. David turned to me. I handed him the thumb drive I had retrieved from the safety deposit box. Your Honor, David said, we have introduced a newly discovered piece of evidence, retrieved yesterday from a secure location pursuant to a trust amendment drafted by the decedent, Robert Watson. It is an audio recording. Caroline stiffened. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Mark, sitting in the gallery behind her, put his head in his hands. David plugged the drive into the court's AV system. Plays, David said. The room went silent. Then, static hissed through the speakers. And then, a voice. It was my father. Hearing him was like a physical blow. His voice sounded thin, tired, but distinct. I don't understand these terms. My father's voice said, it says the interest rate adjusts after 2 years, and this fee, it is 4% up front? Then, another voice cut in. Smooth, confident, condescending. I recognized it immediately. It was Stephen Keller. Robert, look at me. The fee is standard for high-risk restructuring. You have code violations piling up. The city is going to put a lien on the house anyway. We are offering you a lifeline. But the payment, my father said, I can't make this payment on my pension. You won't have to, Keller's voice said. The market is going up. In 6 months, we refinance you into a conventional loan. Caroline handles the paperwork. She knows the plan. I should call Bella. My father said, she understands these contracts. There was a pause, a silence that stretched for 5 heartbeats. Then Keller spoke again, his voice lower, harder. If you call Bella, she is going to tell you to sell the house. She doesn't care about the legacy. She will put Ellen in a home and sell this place to strangers. Is that what you want? No, my father whispered. Then sign the papers. Robert, Keller said, protect your wife. Your daughters will thank you. The audio cut out. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I looked at Caroline. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the table, tears streaming silently down her face. She knew. She had been there. She had let them manipulate him. Judge Vance took off his glasses. He looked at Mr. Thorne. Your daughters will thank you. The judge repeated. That sounds an awful lot like undue influence. Counselor. And since Mr. Keller sits on the board of the lending institution. It sounds like a conflict of interest that borders on criminal conspiracy. Mr. Thorne adjusted his tie. He looked significantly less confident. Your Honor, that recording is out of context. We don't know when it was made. It is dated and time-stamped. David interrupted, and it matches the date on the disclosure timeline written by the decedent. Judge Vance raised a hand. I have heard enough. He picked up his pen. I am ordering a full forensic accounting of the estate, going back 5 years. I am ordering a forensic review of all signatures on the Apex Capital documents. He looked at Caroline. Mrs. Watson Miller, you are hereby removed as executor, effective immediately. Your powers to administer this estate are suspended. I am appointing Samuel Roth as independent special trustee to oversee all assets, including the property on Elm Street. Caroline let out a small, choked sob. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice hardening, I am issuing a temporary injunction against Apex Capital and Bright Harbor Renewal, preventing any foreclosure action until this court determines the validity of the underlying debt. If I find that this loan was originated through fraud, I will void the lien myself. He banged the gavel. We are adjourned. It wasn't a cheer that went up. It was the sound of a balloon deflating. The tension broke. Caroline slumped in her chair. Defeated. It wasn't just a legal loss. It was a stripping of her identity. For 5 years, she had been the one in charge, the one handling things. Now, she was just a witness to her own failure. I stood up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. We walked out into the hallway. The marble floors echoed with the footsteps of lawyers rushing to bill their hours. Mr. Henderson, the man from the mediation, the one who had offered me $10,000, stepped into my path. He looked rattled. Ms. Watson, he said, forcing a smile. Can we have a word? Privately? David stepped between us. Anything you have to say, you can say to me. Henderson lowered his voice. Look, this forensic review. It is going to be expensive for everyone. It will drain the estate. Apex is willing to make a substantial offer to settle this today. We will forgive the loan, entirely. We will release the lien. The house is yours, free and clear. I looked at him. $150,000. Forgiven. Just like that. They were terrified of what the audit would find. They were terrified of Stephen Keller's name appearing on a criminal indictment. All we ask, Henderson said, sliding a document from his briefcase, is that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the audio recording and the origination details. We seal the file. We walk away. I looked at the document. It was a hush check, a bribe to bury the truth about how they preyed on my father. If I signed it, I would get the house. I would win the asset. I would be financially whole. But my father hadn't left me the trust amendment so I could get rich. He had left it so I could break the cycle. I looked Henderson in the eye. No, I said, Ms. Watson, be reasonable. You are turning down a 6-figure settlement. I am turning down a gag order. I said, I want the forensic review. I want every email, every text, every meeting minute between your company and my sister to be part of the public record. I want the town to know exactly how Bright Harbor renews a neighborhood. Henderson's jaw tightened. You are making a mistake. We will bury you in paperwork. You can try, David said, stepping forward. But now we have the trustee on our side. And Mr. Roth is very thorough. Henderson stormed off. I turned to see Caroline standing by the water fountain. Mark had gone to bring the car around. She was alone. She looked small. The tailored suit looked like a costume now. I walked over to her. She didn't look at me. She was staring at the water fountain drain. I hated you, she whispered. I stopped. What? I hated you, she said again, her voice flat. When you left for the city, when you got that job, you looked so free. You came home for Christmas that year, and you talked about your promotion, and your apartment, and your friends. And Mom and Dad looked at you like you were the sun. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. I was here, Bella. I was changing Mom's sheets. I was driving Dad to cardiology appointments. I was listening to them worry about money. And you were gone. You were the successful one. I was just the faithful one, the one who stayed. So you decided to punish me? I asked. I decided I deserved it, she said. I told myself that the house was my payment, that I had earned it by being the one who endured the decline. When the debt started piling up, when Mark's business failed, I felt like I was owed a lifeline. I thought, Bella doesn't need this. She has everything. You stole from them. Caroline, you didn't just take from me. You stole their peace. I was trying to keep the status, she hissed. I couldn't let the neighbors know we were broke. I couldn't let you know. If you knew, you would have looked at me with that pity, that quiet, judging pity. Poor Caroline. She never really launched. Did she? I shook my head. I never thought that. I thought you were the capable one. I thought you were the one holding it together. That is why I stayed away. I thought you didn't need me. She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. I needed you every day. But I couldn't ask, because asking would mean admitting I wasn't perfect. And being perfect was the only thing I had over you. She revealed the final piece of the puzzle then. Stephen Keller saw it. She said, he saw how desperate I was to be the hero. He told me that if I used the equity, I could invest in Mark's business, turn it around, and pay off the mortgage before anyone knew. He told me I would be financially untouchable. He played to my vanity, Bella, and I let him. Mark pulled up to the curb. Caroline straightened her jacket, a reflex that was purely muscle memory. What happens now? She asked. Now. Samuel Roth takes over. I said, he will sell the house. Sell it? She looked horrified. But there is no saving it. Caroline, the debt is real, even if the judge voids the interest. The principal is still there. The estate is insolvent. Samuel will sell it to pay the creditors. So we lose it? She asked. After all of this, we both lose it? I looked at her. I realized then that we were speaking different languages. She was speaking the language of assets. I was speaking the language of truth. The house was lost 5 years ago. I said, it was lost the day you decided to lie to Dad. We are just burying the body now. She got into the car. She didn't say goodbye. I stayed in town for 2 more days. I met with Samuel Roth. We went through the house together. It was strange to walk through the empty rooms with a clipboard, tagging items for auction, the dining room table where we had Thanksgiving dinners, tag number 402, the armchair where Dad read his paper, tag number 403. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a movie set after the production has wrapped. The walls were still that lifeless gray. The staging furniture had been removed, leaving dust bunnies and indentations in the carpet. I walked into the kitchen. I stood by the stove. I closed my eyes and tried to smell my mother's pot roast. I tried to hear the sound of the radio playing the oldies station, but all I could hear was the static of the audio recording. Your daughters will thank you. I opened my eyes. The house was just wood and plaster. It wasn't the legacy. The legacy was the letter in my pocket. The legacy was the fact that my father, in his final, terrified moments, had chosen to trust me, even if he couldn't tell me. Samuel came into the kitchen. We have a potential buyer, he said. A young couple, not a developer. They want to restore it. They hate the gray paint. I smiled. Good. The foreclosure is paused. Samuel said, but you understand, Bella, by the time we pay the lawyers, the forensic accountant, and settle the legitimate portion of the debt, there won't be much left, maybe $20,000. I don't care about the money. Samuel, I know, he said. He handed me a key. The key to the front door. You should be the one to lock up. I waited until evening. I knew Caroline would come. She couldn't stay away. She had to say goodbye to the object of her obsession. She arrived at sunset. She didn't have a key anymore, but the door was unlocked. She walked into the kitchen. She looked smaller in jeans and a sweater. The armor was gone. She saw me standing by the counter. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just leaned against the wall, looking exhausted. Samuel told me. She said, he is selling it to a teacher. That seems fitting. I said, she looked around the room. I ruined it. Didn't I? Yes, I said. You did. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what to do. Bella, Mark is leaving. The business is gone. My friends, the ones who filmed you moving out, they stopped calling the day the news broke about the hearing. I have nothing. I looked at my sister. I saw the bully, the liar, the thief, but I also saw the frightened woman who had been groomed by a predator and crushed by an expectation she couldn't meet. I reached into my bag. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. What is that? She asked, flinching. Another lawsuit? No, I said. I opened the envelope. Inside were printouts, hundreds of them, screenshots of her social media posts, protecting the legacy, Bella the unstable one, affidavits from the neighbors about her neglect, the email chains where she badmouthed me to the family, the proof of her character assassination. This is the nuclear option, I said. This is the evidence I was going to give to the judge to prove that you acted with malice. This would ensure that you are not just removed, but potentially charged with criminal defamation. It would destroy whatever reputation you have left in this town. Caroline stared at the stack. Her face was gray. Why are you showing me this? Because I am not going to file it, I said. She looked up, confused. What? I am giving you a choice. Caroline, a narrow mercy. I slid the stack toward her. You cooperate with Samuel. You answer every question the forensic accountant asks. You tell the truth about Keller, about Bright Harbor, about everything. You help us nail them. You stop fighting the trustee. You stop playing the victim. And if I do, then this file goes into the shredder, I said. I won't sue you for defamation. I won't pursue the personal liability for the fraud beyond what the estate covers. I will let you walk away. You will walk away with nothing, but you will walk away free. She touched the papers. Why? After everything I did? Because Dad asked me to. I said, because he didn't want his family destroyed. He just wanted the truth. I pointed to the papers. He let you fold so I could survive. I said, now, I am letting you fold so you can survive. Caroline looked at the papers, then at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. I will do it, she whispered. I will tell them everything. I nodded. Good. I walked past her, toward the back door. Bella? She called out. I stopped, my hand on the knob. Will I ever see you again? I looked back at the empty kitchen, at the gray walls, at the sister who had become a stranger. I don't know. Caroline. I opened the door and walked out into the cool evening air. I didn't look back at the house. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. The road back to the city was dark, illuminated only by the headlights cutting through the night. I turned on the radio. It was just noise. I turned it off. I drove in silence. I felt lighter than I had in 5 years. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a check for $1 million. I had my name. I had my father's trust. And for the first time in a long time, I had a future that wasn't defined by the past. I checked the North Star, and I drove home. Thank you so much for listening to After My Parents' Funeral. My older sister took the house and kicked me out. But 5 years later, it has been a journey of betrayal, justice, and the hard truth about what it means to protect a legacy. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Bella's fight for the truth, please hit that subscribe button to join the Revenge Stories community. We have many more tales of justice coming your way. And finally, I want to hear from you. Do you think Bella was right to show her sister mercy in the end? Or should she have exposed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one. Until next time.